D-U-R-E. Moving the house. D-U-R-E. Moving the house.
I'm Delia Van Prague, and this is Nothing Ventured. Today we have our first guest, Dan Victor.
One of the media members here. I work alongside Matt. He is also, works in the media unit. We both, help facilitate.
So how did you get to Venture House?
Well, I applied. I am a staff worker here, social practitioner, and I really was a bit frustrated because I saw how, there wasn't as much support for mental health or the kind of work that I'd really like to do, and I wanted to do more. And something that was in my field, and I saw a social practitioner, and I said, "Oh wow, I'm very good at being social," And I liked the Clubhouse. I said, "Oh, it's a Clubhouse." I didn't know anything about Clubhouse, so I joined. I applied, and it also said something about the media unit. So I applied because I have background in working in media. I did advertising for many years, and I was also the editor of a magazine called Pop Dust. It was an online website actually, but it was covering pop culture, music, movies, things like that.
Really cool.
Yeah. So that's sort of how I came here and why I applied. But I didn't know anything about this.
That's how you got here.
Yeah.
So this is a mental health podcast, so most of the questions are about your mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So when were you first diagnosed, and has your diagnosis changed over time?
That's a good question. So when I first found out, when I was first diagnosed and when I knew there was a problem, those are two different times because I always had problems growing up. Even when I was a little kid, I preferred to be left alone. So I was isolating from a young age, and I had a lot of difficulty socially. I looked like I should fit in or be normal, whatever that means. And I always felt like, there was this expectation to be a certain way, and I wasn't that. So I had a hard time fitting in. But depression really started around middle school, but I didn't get diagnosed until it became like a serious problem when I was about 25. But it took about 5 years of treatment and going to different doctors and therapists before I got my diagnosis when I was about 30. So it was a long road, and it was almost a relief to sort of have some reason why I am the way I am.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
To me, when I got my diagnosis, it felt like almost like a breath of fresh air, or it just the answer to so many questions. And it just feels like a place where you're like, okay, now I know where to start, or now I understand why I am this way.
So you experienced that same like uncertainty of like, I found myself talking to God a lot. I'm like, why God am I, what did I do to be like this? I don't even know what this is, or maybe I'm doing something wrong. Like I did something wrong and now this is my punishment, without getting into like feeling like I did something in a past life. I just meant like, maybe I was, I had been drinking, I drank a lot in college, and
me too.
That was, there was always a reason like, oh, it's seasonal. Oh, it's, there isn't a lot of light out, or maybe it's because I'm in the Northeast. Maybe I need to move, which I did. I moved to California, Southern California, and I was like, oh, the weather will be nice there all year round. and I was miserable there too. So I was like, okay, well, that's not it. Anyway, sorry.
No, I get it. I went to school in Chicago, and it felt like, oh, it's Tuesday. That's a reason to drink.
Right.
You know,
Oh, yeah. Tuesdays, thirsty Tuesdays, or
so you talked a little bit about this, but can you tell us a little about your mental health journey? And I guess I mean like maybe different episodes that stand out, or hospitalizations, or like a really high high and a low.
okay. All right. To answer your question, my mental health journey. Well, it's wild because it's hard to tell what was a result of biology or trauma or self-induced psychosis. I have my diagnosis is bipolar unspecified, and it's a little confusing because I thought it was depression at first, because I spent a lot of time in bed, but not so much as somebody who is like, say, clinically depressed, like 12, 13 hours. I would just, on the weekends after work, I would just be in bed, and, maybe I'd be drinking or smoking, pot or, whatever. And I just like to be there. And, and I had difficulty being around people. I really struggled, even though I was good at, I felt like I was gregarious at times. And, when I was in college, I remember I just feel like nobody liked me. And and I just felt like, well, drinking helped me fit in. I was like one of the guys, or one of the, guys, girls, whatever. But like, I was one of not the in crowd, because I didn't even get along with the in crowd or the freaky crowd. I just kind of hung out with all these people that were really cool, creative folks. So I kind of, felt like I was a creative. I could identify with being sort of an outsider. So that was like my early years, and how I understood the world. And then I'm like, oh, okay, well, smoking really chills me out. It's not as intense as drinking. So I kind of embraced that. I moved to California when I was 25, because I wanted to try to make a change. I had had a hard time of it, a lot of depression in Philadelphia where I was living. And then I eventually, after a couple of years of living there, and pretty much, crying at work, on the phone with my mom, which I had a very strained relationship with. I'd stopped talking to her for a number of years. Stopped talking to my father for a number of years, off and on. And, I had to move home because they were trying to get me treatment out there. My dad, took me to church with him because he thought, oh, maybe you need to have some positive influences. And it just, I'd hear, why don't you snap out of it? And I'm like, I wish I knew how. I don't know. So then he said, okay, well, there's some, serious mental illness that I got to address. I moved home to my mom's house, and it was pretty horrible because it was the first, going to doctors, going to treatment. I went to go get treatment, and then they talked about my, my drug use and my drinking, and they're like, oh, you're an addict. So I had to go to MICA, which, for listeners who don't know, it's mentally ill, chemically addicted, and that was the thing at that time. So they said, well, if you want treatment and medication, you have to go through this program. So I went through an outpatient rehab. That was awesome. I don't think being sober was necessarily the answer. Definitely didn't stop my depression. I found out, once I got diagnosed, I didn't realize what mania was. I just thought that's the way the world was. And I started to come to understand that people's life experience, how they experience emotions, mine were so intense. I felt them physically. You know, I felt highs very high, I felt lows very low, and it was, you know, and people couldn't understand why my feelings were debilitating and, or, you know, like a drug. And then, you know, you add all the other stuff on top of it. It was a very big roller coaster ride of inconsistency for many, many years. I got stability in my 30s, and then I moved into New York, and I was working in advertising. You know, and then I had a very long period of stability. I found medication that worked after being felt like I was a guinea pig with all these different things, and you know, doctors doing this stuff. Like, I was on so many horrible medications. I'm grateful I've been on the same medication for years. And I felt like good, you know, I was able to date, and I was able to, like, you know, go out and have friends, and I felt like I was a normal person. And yeah, I smoked, and then I drank, and you know, and then I got into a few other things, like, you know, I was like, I was doing some acid, no big deal. Then I did a little coke, and then I did a little this, a little that, and you know, it wasn't all the time, but it was became more regular, and I realized that some of that use was dealing with some like from my perspective, unresolved trauma, which eventually kind of came to a head in my you know, early mid 40s. And you know, I, you know, became a full-blown addict, where I, you know, became addicted to cocaine. And you know, I'd lost my job, I had really lost a lot of friendships. And I, you know, I mean, it was sort of by my own design. It wasn't like, oh, you know, my friends turned on me. It's like I just, you know, stopped calling people, and they just didn't call me, you know, and I stopped, you know, alienated a lot of people, which can be very, I don't know, it's tough. So, you know, but long story short, I ended up going into treatment, getting sober, 5 years sober now. And
Congratulations.
thank you very much. Thank you. And that was a big part of it. But like, I, you know, I went to therapy. I, you know, got regular psychiatrist that was in New York. I got off Xanax, which I have anxiety as well, and I found a non-narcotic anti-anxiety med that worked well, because I had a lot of issues with, you know, I describe it as not anger but frustration that manifested into you know, extreme frustration. So, but you know, music. I was hospitalized. Actually, that was really my hospitalization was sort of like the pinnacle of when I decided that I really needed to change. And you know, I was sort of accidentally, I was like, no, I didn't mean to call the ambulance. I just you know, I was like, I called 911 because I wanted to, you know, check myself into a hospital, and they're like, no, we're going to send an ambulance.
Oh, no.
And I was like, no, I didn't mean that. And they're like, well, it's too late, you gotta but you know, I don't know, that's a lot of stuff. I'm very chatty.
No, it's exactly the stuff that I was looking for.
Okay, good.
So my next question is actually about medication.
Mm-hmm.
You said you do take medication,
Mhm.
and if you feel comfortable talking about it, what medications do you take?
Okay, well, I take lamotrigine, and I take hydroxyzine. So what that is it's actually a seizure medication, lamotrigine, but it's a mood stabilizer for bipolar, and the anti-anxiety is hydroxyzine, which I heard was like came about as a allergy medicine. But it's non-narcotic. It's not, you know, it's not one of the benzos, which I had found success. Like, it would take, you know, but I was having like panic attacks, like full-blown panic attacks. Like, I thought I was having a heart attack. And, you know, since I've been on a hydroxyzine, I have been so much more even. You know, I was on a couple different versions, and, you know, I'm on a couple different doses. I toned down the lamotrigine, but I'm afraid to go off, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I don't remember, I don't know what my life would be like now if I went off, and I don't want to find out.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I don't know. Some people are like anti-meds, and I was like, well, it's a personal choice. It's whatever works for you, but I know that my life has gotten better because of medication.
I feel the same way because I'm sometimes I feel like I'm anti-meds, but I know that I need the meds. I feel like with the meds, life is livable.
Mm-hmm.
And before I got this cocktail of meds, which is still too much, I think, because I take about 5 medications.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, it's a miracle I'm sitting up talking. I should be zoned out in a corner.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't really have the privilege of being able to be anti-meds. I feel like it's just what I need.
Do you feel like it's a biological thing, or is it something that helps supplement something that's happened?
Oh gosh, probably both.
Yeah.
I definitely think it's biological because my dad wasn't diagnosed bipolar, but was very, very likely bipolar. He also had a brain tumor that was like the size of an orange on his frontal lobe.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and he was fine after the surgery, but
Oh, my God.
yeah,
Wow.
I know. I thought he was gonna die, but he was actually fine. He just lost his sense of taste and smell. So that was kind of a weird one. So he was most likely bipolar, and my grandmother, his mother, was diagnosed bipolar.
Mm.
And I also think my dad might have had a bit of OCD. Just had some rituals and very particular about certain things, and not just like neat and clean.
Right.
Because that's not OCD. And then as far as covering something up, I don't know. I think that I went through a lot in a truncated period of time when I was younger. My dad went to rehab when I was like 14.
Oh, wow.
And then when I was 15 or 16, my mom came out as gay.
Mm.
And
Wow.
yeah, and it was a lot to take as a kid because it was like with another mother from our church.
Oh, wow.
And I was friends with the 3 daughters of this woman. So it was crazy. And then that kind of like, I think, stopped me from coming out.
Mm.
All right, so I have 2 final questions.
Okay, I gotcha.
One is, what is something that you really love about Venture House?
Well, one thing I love is, I would say when I think about Venture House, I think about the people. And I think about how many wonderful people there are here and how, and I'm not just talking about coworkers. I mean the members here. I feel very connected. I feel accepted. I feel like people get me and I get them, I mean, there's always this feeling of people not getting it. And I feel like there's more people here that get it than anywhere else I've been. And to work and come every day to this place that is dedicated to helping people with mental illness, I feel honored to be a part of it and want to serve. That's all I really want to do is serve the community, and what I get back is unmeasurable.
That's beautiful. And you're sort of an inspiration of someone who has their own mental health journey and is able to hold down a job,
Mm-hmm.
and a job that actually gives back to people and that you enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, I think that's one of the things that I do worry about is like, will I ever be able to hold a regular job? Among other worries.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that's like, isn't that sort of what it's being normal or being able to support yourself. It does mean a lot to like be supportive of you, support yourself. So one thing that people that live with mental illness are very often underestimated. And I think that people are smart, people are talented. I've seen more talented people here, and it's like you keep discovering and peeling back the onion. It's like even before I got into mental health, I really like nurturing people's creativity. I appreciated those who had served me before in terms of supporting my creative visions. And if I had only had somebody here guiding me, I would have been able to do so much more. And it's fulfilling to facilitate that. It's one thing to support people, but it's another thing to have expectations. And when you meet those expectations, I think that's where meaningful work comes from. It's not just like, oh, here's something to do. It's saying, okay, well, let's look at what what makes you, inspired.
Well, I have one more question, and it's just one thing that you really love about yourself.
One thing that I love about myself. Wow, that's a hard one.
There's got to be something you love about yourself.
Well, there's many things. No, I can honestly say I've always, done my very best. So, and part of the reason that is because there's a lot of people who say, why can't you do more? Or why can't you do better? Or that's maybe what I feel. And, I have to do my best and be honest to myself. So I think it's like chart because that's what I think I love about myself. Like character wise, I have a strength of character. But what I'm proud of is the work, creatively that I've learned and done, regardless of success or monetary, but I feel like I've done things I'm proud of, creatively.
That's great. All right, well, that is all. Once again, I'm Delia Van Prague. I'm a member here at Venture House, and this is Nothing Ventured. Thanks again to Dan Victor for being our first guest, and have a mentally healthy day.
Awesome.
Yay!
Moving to house.